Thankfully, there weren't any bad wrestling games on the Sega Dreamcast. North America did kind of get screwed over a bit with this genre, where most of the really good wrestling games were Japan exclusives. That's kind of a shame, but hey, the ones that we got were at least average to good. So let's get into the list and just see where they all fall. The Dreamcast version of WWF Attitude is actually pretty rough. When I started playing this version, I didn't know a few things about the development, and my initial thoughts weren't too different from the PS1 and the N64 versions. However, I did think this was the worst out of the three. The controls feel a little bit more awkward, and then I learned that, hey, the development was pretty rushed. That's why it doesn't look as good as it probably could. Acclaim released this version of the game right before they were about to lose the WWF license, so the port got rushed. It doesn't look any different from the PS1 or the N64 version, and when you see what they were able to do with Anarchy Rules, you can tell that they could have done a lot better with the graphics. The gameplay is essentially the same, the controls are a little more awkward, and the graphics are the same. Out of the three versions of ECW Hardcore Revolution that were released, I think the Dreamcast got the best version. The controls just feel a little bit better here, the graphics are still okay, the controls are much better than WWF Attitude, but it is still the same thing. This is, again, just WWF Attitude with a hardcore paint on it, and not even a really good hardcore paint. This port didn't seem to be rushed, and you can tell the differences between this and, Attitude, because it's just easier to play than that game. Pretty much everything that I've said about the other ports of ECW Hardcore Revolution apply here. It isn't a bad game. The problem is that the engine was very old at this point, and other wrestling games had kind of surpassed what this one could do. It's a perfectly fine game, but it doesn't do anything to really elevate itself above the crowd. Of the three Acclaim games that were released on the Dreamcast, I think Anarchy Rules is the best. It is still saddled with the awkward gameplay and kind of weird controls and somewhat tedious career mode, but it's less tedious than the others. I think the graphics look a little bit better, the controls kind of feel a little bit better. This is better than, WWF Attitude, and I think it's a little better than ECW Hardcore Revolution. Like the other Acclaim games, if you enjoyed WWF Warzone, there's a chance that you'll like this one. It's not guaranteed, but there is a chance. The developers did make a few changes to the engine, so in theory it's a little bit better. They tried to make it better at least. They kind of reduced what you could do with the career mode, so it's less tedious. They added a stable mode to it. They did more things, but at the end of the day, you're still just playing the same Acclaim wrestling game. WWF Royal Rumble was an exclusive to the Dreamcast. It is based off of an arcade game, and I think it's got probably the best graphics and the best controls out of the four. It's just lacking in game modes. This was originally an arcade game, so it's got arcade gameplay. It only has 2 game modes, which is really just kind of sad. If there was more to this game, it would be awesome. But unfortunately, it's just a little bit above average. I enjoyed the gameplay a lot more just because it was easier to do everything in this. And yeah, it feels like you're playing an arcade version of one of the SmackDown games. So, if you liked SmackDown, you might like this one, but you're probably going to be disappointed with what you can do and really what you can't do in this. It is a good game, but ultimately it's kind of disappointing because of what little is there. The reviews for all 4 of these games were very harsh. I got the impression that many of the reviewers were just tired of the Acclaim engine, which I can completely understand. I was tired of it too at this point, but I didn't think it warranted, taking WWF Attitude, which had previously received like 8s and 7s, and giving it like a 4. That just didn't make any sense to me. It seemed like a lot of these reviews were written by people who either hated wrestling or only watched the WWF. I can completely understand the second one because not everybody watched ECW and WCW. Sometimes they did just watch one promotion. That happened a lot, actually. But it seems weird that the editor would give this game, or like the review for this game, to somebody who just hated wrestling. Maybe it wasn't the case that there was a reviewer and somebody just picked one up. I got the impression a few of these publications were just blogs where anybody could post anything. And yeah, that really became apparent when you go to something like Planet Dreamcast and their reviews are just shit, to put it in a nice way. I can't really put it in any other way. They're pretty awful reviews. The more mainstream publications, or the ones that you may know and are still around today, they seem more reasonable, except for Game Informer, who, called for the developers to be killed, which was just strange and very bizarre that anyone allowed that to go to print, but there it was. It was just very strange to see a lot of these reviews and how people really hated the games on the Dreamcast. Some of it was understandable, where the graphics weren't as improved as they really thought they should be, but yeah, just really going after it in the way that they didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Looking back at these games was kind of fascinating. It was mostly the same games that I had gone over on the N64 and on the PS1, but there was one exclusive, and that was kind of cool. And none of the WCW games made it over, which was a little surprising, but given the state of where ECW was at the time, I guess I can kind of understand that. I don't think WCW Mayhem would have been any better on the Dreamcast than it was on the N64 or on the PS1, but it would have been interesting to have at least seen that in the mix with this, because that game probably could have been released on the Dreamcast. Thankfully, I didn't have to play WCW Thunder or Nitro or Backstage Assault, so that was at least great. Thankfully, there really weren't any bad games on this very short list, and it would have been nice if some of the Japanese exclusives had been brought over. I guess the Dreamcast's lifespan just wasn't long enough to allow that to be ported over, but it would have been really cool to have seen some of that. And at least it gives me a reason to want to go out and try to get like an import version of those games, and also to get a Dreamcast that could play it. I'm not sure if it's region locked or not, but there are probably ROMs of it online or something like that. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.